You've been feeling it too, haven't you? That subtle shift in the world around you. The floorboards groaning a little louder, the walls seeming to sigh. We trust the ground beneath our feet, the buildings that shelter us. But what if that trust is slowly, insidiously being betrayed? Join us in the shadows. Like and subscribe to never miss a nightmare, because tonight, the foundations of reality begin to crack. Elias Vance knew structures. He knew them with a deep, almost spiritual understanding. Every beam, every column, every hidden support. He was a structural engineer, meticulous to a fault, driven by a past incident that still whispered in his quiet moments. A building once under his care had failed. The memory was a cold, constant weight, a promise to never let it happen again. Now the historic Blackwood Library consumed his days. A grand old dame, all stone and heavy timber, a monument to endurance. He walked its halls, a silent guardian, checking every arch, every lintel, ensuring its absolute, unwavering stability. He ran his hand over the ancient stone, feeling for any tremor, any imperfection. His tools were his eyes, his ears. Then he saw it, a faint, thin crack on a massive stone support in the basement, barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't a surface crack. It seemed to go impossibly deep, a dark line against the solid gray. Its pattern was too precise, too deliberate for a simple stress fracture. It looked almost drawn. Elias dismissed it. Old age, he told himself, buildings settle, stone cracks, it's natural. But a cold knot formed in his stomach, an unsettling feeling, a whisper of wrongness that wouldn't leave. He returned with his advanced scanners, running them over the crack, searching for answers the stone refused to give. The readings were normal, perfectly normal, no stress, no weakness, impossible. The crack was right there. Yet the crack persisted, a silent accusation against his instruments, against his knowledge. Days turned into weeks. Elias noticed other things, small, barely perceptible shifts in the building's alignment. A slight tilt in a doorframe, a faint dip in the grand arches, too subtle to be natural settling. He measured, remeasured. The numbers were off, but only by fractions, easily dismissed by a less obsessed mind. His colleague, old Mr. Henderson, chuckled one morning. Just the old girl settling, Elias. Happens to all of them. Elias felt a cold dread. This wasn't settling. This was something else. Something deliberate. The building felt different. Not just old, but tired, as if its very bones were weary. He often stayed late, long after the last librarian had locked up, alone in the echoing silence. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the building's own sounds, creaks, groans, whispers. Then one night he heard it, a deep, resonant groan, not wood or metal, but something far deeper. It was the sound of immense, slow-motion agony, coming from the very stone, the very bones of the library. He froze, his heart hammering. What was that? A settling? No, this was different. This was a cry. He moved through the stacks, flashlight beam cutting through shadows, searching for the source of the terrible sound. It led him to the basement, to a section of reinforced concrete, gray and unyielding. It looked solid, like any other column, but when he touched it, it felt wrong, unnaturally soft, like damp clay yielding under his fingers, yet it held its shape. A horrifying sensation. Concrete shouldn't feel like this. It should be hard, unyielding, but this felt alive somehow. He pressed harder, A faint indentation remained. It almost felt like the column was breathing, a slow, soft pulse. A shiver ran down his spine. This was beyond decay. This was something else entirely. He rushed back to his office, grabbed his most advanced scanners, instruments designed for the impossible. He ran them over the soft concrete, then other load-bearing elements throughout the building. The readings were impossible. Internal structures were absent, not decayed, but simply not there. As if siphoned away, the numbers defied physics, showing negative values, a vacuum of support. It was like looking inside a body and finding vital organs missing. Yet the body still stood. Driven by a terrible certainty, he went back to the first crack, the one that started it all. The thin line had stretched, grown longer, undeniably. Its edges were not sharp, fractured, but strangely smooth, worn, like centuries of erosion, but in mere weeks. The stone wasn't breaking, it was being consumed from within, slowly, agonizingly. Elias understood. Something was feeding on the very purpose of support itself. An unseen strain, metabolizing the strength, the integrity, leaving only a hollow shell. The Blackwood Library wasn't just settling, it was unlearning how to stand. And if it could happen here, in this monument to stability, what about the rest of the world? The terror was not in collapse, but in the conscious, malevolent dissolution of purpose. Elias Vance felt the ground shift beneath his own feet. The foundations of his objective reality were beginning to betray him. The ground had shifted beneath Elias Vance, not just physically, but in his very understanding of reality. The library wasn't just old, it was actively unlearning its purpose. His terror turned to a cold, burning obsession. He could not, would not, let another structure fail. Not again, not while he still breathed. The memory of that soft, concrete column, yielding under his touch, haunted his waking moments. It was a violation of everything he knew. He plunged back into the Blackwood Library, his sanctuary now a laboratory of dread. Every creak, every groan was a data point. His advanced scanners, designed for the impossible, now revealed truths that shattered physics itself. They showed him horrors beyond comprehension. He recorded impossible material data. Steel beams, solid and strong, registered internal voids. Not rust, not decay, but empty space. Imagine looking at something solid, something you trust, and knowing its core is simply gone, vanished, as if it was never there. Concrete foundations, meant to bear immense weight, now showed a loss of density. They were becoming lighter than air, yet still stood. How could a building stand on foundations that were less dense than the very air around them? It defied every law of nature. Elias felt a cold, creeping doubt about his own sanity. Was he seeing things? Was his mind finally cracking under the strain? But his instruments, cold and objective, confirmed the impossible. The data screamed a truth he couldn't ignore, a truth that horrified him. The horror wasn't confined to the Blackwood Library. He began to see it everywhere, in the very fabric of the city around him. Other buildings, old and new, began to show similar, unsettling signs. A warped window frame on an apartment building. A faint, almost imperceptible slant to the floors in his own apartment building. Was it just him, or was the world truly shifting? We all trust the straight lines, the solid angles of our homes, don't we? What if those lines were beginning to betray us? He started noticing a specific ripple effect on certain surfaces, like the material itself was breathing a slow, deep pulse. An old brick wall, centuries old, began to weep dust, not from decay, not from erosion, but from an internal, unseen strain. It was like watching a living thing in agony, silently shedding its very essence. A horrifying, slow-motion disintegration. His colleagues grew concerned. His intense focus, his wild theories, his gaunt appearance, they urged him to rest, to step away. "Elias, you look unwell," Mr. Henderson said, his voice kind, worried. "You need to take a break, son. This isn't healthy." But how could he rest? The buildings were calling to him, whispering their silent pain. He felt it in his bones. He felt a subtle hum around him, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very earth. The library felt alive, but in pain. A deep, resonating ache seemed to pulse through its ancient bones. A slow, agonizing heartbeat that only he could perceive. He spent nights alone in the echoing silence, documenting every new anomaly, every impossible shift. His sanity frayed at the edges. One night he witnessed something that froze his blood. A historic stone arch, massive and ancient, visibly sagged. A full millimeter, measured with laser precision. His heart hammered. This was it, the beginning of the end, the collapse. But then, impossibly, it slowly returned to place, as if the building itself was fighting, struggling against an unseen force. A terrible, conscious effort to hold itself together, to resist the insidious strain. What kind of malevolent sentience was this? The security guard, old Mr. Jenkins, reported strange sighing noises coming from the deeper levels of the library at night. Not wind, not settling pipes. A sound of profound despair, a drawn-out exhalation that echoed in the lonely halls. Elias went down, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. He felt the hum intensify, the ache deepen. Then he heard it, a soft, drawn-out exhalation, deep and resonant, coming from the very stone around him. The building was breathing, and it was in pain. A living entity, slowly being devoured from within, its purpose stolen. He discovered a pattern, a horrifying, undeniable truth that chilled him to his very core. A truth that explained everything. The anomalies always occurred in load-bearing elements. Columns, beams, foundations, the very spine of the structures, always slowly diminishing their capacity to support, siphoning away their strength, their very reason for being, as if they were unlearning their fundamental purpose, forgetting how to stand, how to hold up the weight of the world. The Anima Foundation. The name echoed in his mind, a whisper of an ancient, malevolent force. It fed on support. It metabolized their intended purpose. It turned strength into weakness, stability into a conscious, agonizing collapse. And it was not just buildings. He saw a slight, almost imperceptible sag in the very earth itself, near the library's oldest wall. The world was becoming a place where nothing could bear its own weight, a place where even the ground would betray you. The terror was not in a sudden, violent crash, but in the slow, insidious, conscious dissolution of purpose, a living death. What would you do if the very walls around you became sentient traps, slowly devouring themselves, waiting for you to fall? Elias felt his own mind begin to warp. The lines between material science and malevolent sentience blurred into a horrifying haze. He was losing control, not just of the buildings, but of his own grasp on objective reality. What was real anymore? The guilt of the past incident weighed heavier now, transformed into a desperate, frantic need to understand this new horror. He had to prevent another collapse, but how could he fight something that fed on the very purpose of support? One evening, as he prepared to leave the library, he heard it again. Not a sigh, but a low, guttural moan. It came from the main support column, right by the grand entrance. A sound of immense, terrible hunger growing louder. And Elias felt the floor beneath him dip, just for a moment, a conscious, hungry sigh. The library wasn't just unlearning, it was beginning to consume. The library's floor had dipped, a conscious, hungry sigh beneath Elias's feet. It was not a tremor, but a deliberate yielding, a whisper of immense hunger from the ancient stone. He froze, heart hammering. The main support column by the grand entrance, the source of that low moan, seemed to pulse with an unseen, malevolent life. Elias approached it, his hand outstretched, a cold dread seeping into his bones. What new horror would this ancient structure reveal now? His fingers brushed the stone. It felt colder than before and subtly, impossibly softer, like flesh that had been drained of blood. The next morning, the column had visibly twisted. Not a crack, not a collapse, but a grotesque, slow contortion, like a muscle spasming. It was a silent scream made manifest in stone. His mind reeled. This was beyond decay. This was deliberate, an act of monstrous will. Driven by a frantic need for answers, he plunged into forgotten archives, searching for any mention of such impossible structural failures. He found whispers, old construction logs dismissed as superstitions, spoke of weeping walls and hungry foundations. Folklore hinted at structures devouring themselves, of buildings that unlearned their purpose and sank into the earth. Architectural myths, long since relegated to children's stories, described stone bleeding and wood crying out in agony. The parallels were chilling, too close, too specific to be mere coincidence. An ancient, pervasive evil was at work. His sleep became a torment. Nightmares of crumbling buildings, the screams of those trapped within, echoed his past trauma. He woke in a cold sweat, unable to distinguish the cries of his dreams from the groans of the library around him. The high-pitched hum he'd noticed before intensified, a constant, irritating whine emanating from the areas of weakness. He tried to record it, but his instruments picked up nothing. Was it in his head? Was he finally losing his grip? The world around him felt increasingly distorted, the straight lines of architecture wavering, breathing with unseen intent. Determined to find answers, he decided to survey other potentially affected structures, starting with an old, condemned building downtown. It was a ghost of a building long abandoned, its windows like vacant eyes. But even here, the insidious hum was present. He entered, his flashlight beam cutting through the dust-filled air. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint, high whine. He moved carefully, his boots crunching on debris. The building felt tired but also expectant, as if waiting for him. Then he saw it, a section of the foundation wall, visibly sagging, weeping dust like fine sand. The hum here was almost painful, vibrating through his very bones. A raw, exposed nerve of sound. He stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. The building was moving, not settling, but actively giving way. Silently, without a crash or a groan, the building began to collapse. A horrifying, slow liquefaction. The concrete foundation flowed like thick mud, losing all form, all purpose. It was a liquid death. Steel beams bent like wet spaghetti, contorting into impossible shapes, not breaking, but yielding with grotesque ease. It was deliberate, a purposeful act of structural annihilation, executed with impossible precision. The building didn't fall, it dissolved. It unlearned its very existence, returning to a formless state. Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his heart. This was not decay, not random. This was an active, intelligent force. It was consuming, digesting, twisting, not just materials, but their very purpose, their inherent strength. He felt an unnerving sense of being watched, not by people, but by the buildings themselves, their failing structures almost looking at him. What would it be like to live in a world where the very walls around you held a conscious, malevolent gaze? A primal, instinctual fear clawed at his throat. The built world, his life's work, was becoming his predator. He returned to the Blackwood Library, the silent collapse of the abandoned building etched into his mind. The library felt different now, more alive, more aware, and hungrier. The hum was a constant thrum in his ears. He went to the twisted column, its grotesque shape now undeniable. He ran his gloved hand over its surface. It was colder, softer. The stone yielded slightly like clay, but something else was there now. A faint, glistening film, not dust, not moisture, something else, something organic. He scraped a tiny sample onto a slide, his hands shaking. His scientific training screamed impossible. His gut screamed horror. Under the microscope, it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Not mineral, not biological in any known sense. It pulsed, a faint, slow rhythm, and within it tiny, almost invisible threads like root systems or veins. This was the Anima Foundation, not just a concept, but a tangible, consuming entity. A living horror. It was actively metabolizing the building's strength, ingesting its very purpose, leaving behind this grotesque residue. The library was not just unlearning how to stand. It was being consumed, digested, transformed into something else. And the residue, it was the waste product, the monstrous, organic refuse of a building's agonizing death. He looked at his hand, at the tiny sample. It was alive, and he had touched it. He had brought it closer. The hum intensified in his ears, no longer just a sound, but a vibration that seemed to resonate within his own body. He felt a cold, invasive presence, not just in the building, but within himself. A subtle, insidious strain. Was it metabolizing his own purpose, his own will to stand, to resist? The thought was a chilling, new terror. He felt his own foundations begin to waver. The world was unlearning how to stand, and he, Elias Vance, was unlearning how to be. The feeling had not left Elias. That cold, invasive presence, a subtle strain within his own body. Was it metabolizing his own will to stand? He tried to shake it off, but the unease was constant. A whisper of betrayal from his own bones, his own muscles. Then the news reports started, not just local, but everywhere. Strange structural failures across the city. First, a small local bridge. Its steel arch, meant to be rigid, bowed unnaturally like tired shoulders. It didn't break, it just yielded. A slow, silent surrender. People called it a design flaw. Elias knew better. He saw the unlearning in the images, the insidious strain at work. Then a major highway overpass. Its concrete surface rippled like water, but slow and sickening. Not a tremor, not an earthquake, just a deliberate, impassable flex. The city talked of bad materials. Elias saw the telltale signs, the unnatural calm, the slow, agonizing yield. It was everywhere. He gathered his data. The impassable scanner readings from the library, the condemned building. He tried to warn authorities, city officials, emergency services. He presented his evidence. Seismic activity, they said. New fault lines forming or poor building codes. Elias argued, pleaded, this was different. This was not natural. This was sentient. They looked at him with pity, concern. Elias Vance, the brilliant engineer, was clearly stressed. His reputation, once solid, now cracked under the strain of their disbelief. A new kind of isolation. Then the smaller structures began to collapse. Not suddenly, but with agonizing slowness. An old apartment building. Its brick walls slowly melted inwards, like wax figures in the sun. The demise was drawn out, like a living thing dying, its last breath a silent sigh of stone. People watched in horror, unable to comprehend. The very ground beneath them felt unsure. What would you do if your world simply sagged, if the solid earth became fluid beneath your feet? Elias watched from his window, a grim prophet, seeing his worst fears become real. A skyscraper, a titan of glass and steel, its base began to liquefy. Not suddenly, but slow. The concrete flowed like thick gray syrup, deliberately, horrifyingly. The upper floors shifted with impassable, sickening grace. Not falling, but settling into ruin. He noticed the peculiar calm in the air around them, an unnatural stillness before the fall. The air felt heavy, thick with unseen hunger, a pervasive, malevolent presence. Elias felt the Anima Foundation's presence now, a vast, hungry shadow over the city, feeding on the very concept of support, of stability. Every sagging beam, every rippling road, a meal. He saw a historical monument, one he had personally restored. The old clock tower, a symbol of endurance. It began to bow, its stone base slowly giving way. Then it kneeled, a slow, agonizing descent, a conscious surrender, a final, terrible genuflection before its inevitable collapse. Elias felt a profound, personal betrayal. His life's work undone, the very ideal of structural integrity, marked by this unseen horror. He returned to his research, frantic, desperate. The library, his sanctuary, now a war room. He plunged deeper into forgotten archives, ancient texts, folklore, any whisper of this impassable horror. He found more, fragmented accounts, eerie warnings dismissed as madness, stories of buildings unlearning their purpose, of cities that could not stand. And then a name, repeated in different languages, different eras. Anima Foundation, a pervasive anomaly feeding on structural stress and stability, turning purpose into agony. This was not just a concept, it was real, a living, consuming entity. And it was growing, spreading, its hunger insatiable. Elias felt a cold dread, deeper than before. The world was being eaten alive, and the Anima Foundation, It wasn't just collapsing buildings. It was learning how to unravel the very fabric of reality, piece by agonizing piece. What would it do when it had consumed all the structures? What would be next? He felt a new vibration, not from the buildings, but from the very ground beneath his feet. A deeper hum resonating through the earth itself. The world was beginning to sag. And then a new whisper, colder than any before, not from the stone, but from the air. It spoke of a world without weight, a world where nothing could stand, not even the sky. Elias felt the air grow heavy, pressing down on him, as if the very atmosphere was beginning to unlearn its purpose, to fall. The air grew thick, pressing down on Elias, but it was the ground that truly began to betray him. A low, constant tremor, a conscious sag. He walked, and the earth gave way beneath his feet. Not a collapse, but a soft, unsettling yield, like walking on a half-frozen lake. Hills once solid and unmoving now showed subtle, impassable sags. Their very slopes seemed to breathe, a slow, deep exhalation of stone. Natural rock formations, ancient and strong, displayed fractures that defied geology. Not cracks, but impossibly smooth lines, like surgical incisions. Even the roads, meant to be flat and firm, began to undulate, like waves on a dark, silent ocean. What would you do if the ground itself turned fluid? The feeling of solidity, of permanence, was gone. Every step was a gamble, every surface a potential betrayal. His mind screamed for stability. His past guilt, the collapse he failed to prevent, became a crushing weight, amplified by the pervasive structural agony of the world around him. Every creak of the sagging earth, every groan of a bending building was a fresh wound, a reminder of his failure magnified 1,000 times. He searched frantic for any answer, any way to understand this Anima Foundation, to fight it, to make the world stand again. He pored over ancient texts, whispered legends, forgotten engineering theories, anything that might explain this sentient consumption of purpose. The city was emptying, people fled, but where could they go? The earth itself was becoming a trap, a world without ground. He encountered others, survivors huddled in makeshift camps, their faces etched with a primal, animal fear, not of buildings, but of the ground. They slept in cars, in tents on what little solid ground remained. Their eyes constantly darted down, watching for the subtle sag, the silent yield. Elias saw their terror. It mirrored his own. The terror of a world where the very idea of support was being corrupted, twisted into a weapon. The Anima Foundation wasn't just weakening structures. It was attacking the concept of stability itself, the very purpose of existence. It fed on the inherent strength, the design, the will of things to stand. It turned purpose into agony, form into fluid dread. Then a chilling connection began to form in Elias's mind. A thought so horrifying, it made him physically recoil. His own deep-seated need for absolute structural integrity. His obsession, born of guilt, to prevent any further collapse. This desperate need to guarantee stability, to atone for his past failure. It seemed to attract the Anima Foundation. His purpose, his very reason for being, was it a beacon, a feast for this insidious, hungry entity? He felt its presence directly now, not a physical thing, but a cold thought in his mind, a whisper that coiled around his consciousness. It spoke without words, a silent, insidious suggestion, asterisk your purpose, it is food, asterisk. The whisper grew louder, a chilling echo in his own thoughts. Asterisk you build, we consume, you stand, we feed, asterisk. His life's work, his atonement, was not fighting the horror, it was fueling it. A horrifying, cosmic joke. His guilt, his need for stability, was a lure. He was a beacon for the Anima Foundation, its most desired meal. The city around him was a monument to purposeful collapse, and he, Elias Vance, was its unwitting architect. He had to escape, not from the city but from himself, from his own purpose. But how could he unlearn who he was? The ground continued to sag. The air grew heavy. The whisper in his mind became a constant thrum, a chorus of hunger. He sought refuge in an abandoned, decaying building. Irony was a cruel mistress, a place of ruin, yet still standing, for now. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light. The air was still, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something alive. He moved carefully through the crumbling halls, his footsteps echoing. The silence was not empty, it was watchful, expectant. The hum was here too, faint but present. A low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very floor beneath his feet. He reached a wide, open room. The ceiling sagged, the walls leaned inward, a picture of imminent, agonizing collapse. His eyes scanned the floor, a mosaic of broken tiles and splintered wood. It looked stable enough in this unstable world. But the whisper in his mind intensified, a direct, cold thought, asterisk your purpose is here, asterisk. He felt a strange pull, a magnetic force drawing him deeper into the room. Against his better judgment, he moved forward. Each step felt heavier. The floor groaned, not like old wood, but like a living thing in pain. A familiar, agonizing sound. He stopped, his heart hammering. The hum was directly beneath him now, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through his very bones. The floor began to sag, not slowly like the earth outside, but quickly, deliberately, a sudden, conscious giving way. A terrifying realization dawned. The Anima Foundation wasn't just attracted to his purpose, it was targeting him directly. It was weaponizing his own trauma against him, the fear of collapse, the desire for stability, his Achilles heel. The floor dissolved beneath him, not breaking, but simply ceasing to be. A void opened, dark and hungry. He fell, a sickening drop into the darkness below. A scream caught in his throat, lost in the sudden rush of air. As he plunged, the whisper returned, loud and clear in his mind. Asterisk welcome home, Elias Vance, your purpose is ours, asterisk. He hit something, not solid ground, but a yielding, viscous surface, like falling into deep, soft mud. The substance pulsed around him, warm and strangely organic. It was the waste product, the residue of devoured purpose. He struggled, but it held him, not with force, but with a horrifying, conscious absorption, like a living quicksand. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through his entire body. He felt his own strength, his own will, begin to drain away. The Anima Foundation was not just consuming buildings, it was consuming him, his purpose, his very self. He was becoming food. And as the darkness claimed him, Elias Vance knew this was the ultimate collapse, the unlearning of existence itself, his own agonizing end. Elias, battered and broken, clawed his way out of the collapsing building. Dust choked him. His body screamed, but his spirit was already shattered. He lay on the unstable ground, gasping. The structure behind him groaned, a death rattle of stone and steel. He had escaped, but to what? The world around him was a vast monument to purposeful collapse. Every building, every road, every bridge was a conscious trap. He saw the agony in the bending steel, the silent screams in the cracking concrete. It was all alive, all in pain, all consuming itself. The Anima Foundation was not a force of nature. It was a betrayal, a fundamental unlearning of reality itself, and it could not be fought. Physics and engineering were useless. His life's work, his very purpose, had been a feast for this unseen, malevolent entity. His mind began to fray. The lines between what was real and what was horror blurred into a sickening haze. He saw walls weeping dust, not from decay, but from deep, internal sorrow. He heard foundations screaming silent agony. The sounds were in his head, he knew, but they were also real. The world was a symphony of structural torment. Every groan of a building, every subtle sag of the earth echoed his own guilt, his own past failure. The pervasive sense of structural agony overwhelmed him. It was a physical weight, pressing down, crushing his soul. His trauma, once a private torment, was now the universal truth. The world was collapsing, and he was helpless. He felt the subtle shift, the little tremor in the floor that wasn't there before. You feel it too, don't you? That faint hum, that low vibration in the air. It's not your imagination. The world is unlearning how to stand. You hear the silent sighs of the walls, the quiet groans of the foundations. They are speaking. They are dying. What if the very ground beneath your feet became fluid? What if your home decided it no longer wanted to stand? Elias found himself in the ruins of an old factory. A single, small support beam remained, defying gravity for now. A desperate, final act formed in his broken mind. He would reteach it. He would defy the Anima Foundation. He approached the beam, his heart a frantic drum. This was his last stand, his futile, lonely battle. He reached out, his trembling fingers touching the cold, unyielding metal, or what should have been unyielding. He cradled the beam, whispering words of strength, of purpose. Stand, he pleaded, hold your ground. He spoke of its design, its strength, its inherent will to support. He poured his own fading purpose into it. He closed his eyes, imagining the molecules knitting together, the metal regaining its strength, its memory of being solid. A futile battle against cosmic horror. A man whispering to a beam, trying to defy the end of all things. He felt a subtle vibration, not from the beam gaining strength, but from something else, something hungry. The hum intensified. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A deep, invasive thrum that resonated in his own bones. He opened his eyes. The beam, it was changing, not becoming stronger but softening, yielding. Slowly, agonizingly, the metal began to sag under his touch, like wet rope. His words were feeding it. His desperate need for stability, his very act of trying to reteach it, was being metabolized, turned into further weakness. The Anima Foundation fed on purpose. His purpose, his last desperate hope, was its final, most exquisite meal. He felt a cold, empty realization. The victory was absolute. There was no fighting this, no escape. The world could not stand. Nothing could bear its own weight, not buildings, not the earth, not him. His desperate need for structural integrity had become the ultimate lure, a beacon for the malevolent entity. And the world collapsed, not with a bang, but a slow, agonizing groan, an eternal instability. He felt his own body begin to yield, his bones, his muscles, his very will. They were unlearning their purpose. The hum was deafening now within him, a chorus of unseen hunger consuming his very essence. His vision blurred. The factory walls around him seemed to breathe, to pulse, to liquefy. The floor beneath him sagged deeply. He felt himself sinking, not into mud, but into nothingness. The air grew heavy, pressing down. The sky itself seemed to droop, a vast gray blanket of despair. He was becoming one with the agonizing collapse, part of the Anima Foundation's endless meal. His mind, once sharp and precise, dissolved into a soup of fear and profound, existential dread. The last vestiges of his identity, his purpose, were consumed. He was just another failing structure. His struggle ceased. There was no more fight, only a quiet, terrible acceptance of the end. The Anima Foundation had won. It would continue to spread, to consume, until nothing remained to stand. A world without weight, a world without form, a world of eternal, conscious collapse. Elias Vance, the structural engineer, ceased to be, his purpose metabolized, his existence unlearned. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the slow, agonizing groan of everything giving way. It is a sound you will learn to recognize, a feeling you will never forget. The world is changing. Look around you, feel the floor beneath your feet. Does it feel as solid as it once did? Are you sure? Because the Anima Foundation is still here, and sooner or later, everything and everyone unlearns how to stand.